The screaming metal of the starship Banshee was the only sound Dax could hear over the thundering beat of his own heart. Red warning lights pulsed in a rhythmic, strobe-light panic across the cockpit, illuminating the sweat that dripped from his forehead into his eyes. The navigation console, usually a comforting array of blue holograms, was now a chaotic mess of error messages flashing in angry crimson. Hyperdrive failure, stabilizers offline, gravity well detected. Dax grit his teeth, his knuckles white as he fought the flight stick. It was like trying to wrestle a grizzly bear while sliding down a mudslide. The view screen was no longer showing the streaking lines of hyperspace, but a rapidly expanding sphere of green and blue. A moon. A very large, very fast-approaching moon. He braced himself against the pilot's seat, muttering a string of curses that would have made a dock worker on Mars blush. The ship hit the atmosphere with a violence that rattled his teeth in his skull. Heat shields groaned, temperature gauges spiked, and the Banshee became a falling brick of burning titanium. Below him, an ocean of dense canopy rushed upward. He fired the retro thrusters. One fired, the other coughed and died. The ship slewed sideways, shearing through the upper branches of trees that had to be 300 feet tall. The screech of tearing metal was deafening, a cacophony of destruction that seemed to last for an eternity. Then came the impact. The world turned upside down, then inside out. The safety harness snapped tight against his chest, knocking the wind out of him, before everything went black for a second. When his vision swam back into focus, the silence was heavier than the crash itself. Dax groaned, tasting copper. He fumbled with the release buckle, and with a click, he dropped from the inverted pilot's chair to the ceiling of the cockpit, landing in a heap of shattered glass and loose wiring. He was alive. That was the first surprise. He checked his limbs, bruised, battered, but nothing seemed broken. He stood up, wincing as a sharp pain shot through his ribs. He grabbed his survival pack from the bulkhead, which had miraculously survived the impact, and kicked open the jammed airlock door. The humidity hit him like a physical wall. It was thick, hot, and smelled of ozone and crushing sweetness, like rotting fruit mixed with sulfur. Dax stepped out onto the alien soil, his boots sinking into thick purple moss. The jungle was a hallucinogenic nightmare of color. The trees were massive pillars of obsidian dark wood, their leaves glowing with faint bioluminescent veins of teal and magenta. Strange, multi-winged insects buzzed in the air, leaving trails of light behind them. Dax checked his sidearm. The charge pack was cracked, useless. He tossed it aside and pulled a serrated survival knife from his boot. Great, he thought. Stranded on a disco ball of a moon with a knife and a headache. He spent the first hour scavenging. He managed to salvage a portable atmospheric scanner, a few ration bars, and a localized distress beacon, though he doubted anyone in this sector was listening. He was light years off the trade routes. This was wild space, uncharted, dangerous. He was kneeling by a stream that flowed with silvery, viscous water, splashing his face to clear the grime. When the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, it was a primal instinct, honed by years of dodging automated patrols and rival scavengers in the ruins of Earth. He was being watched. Dax did not move. He kept his head down, pretending to wash the soot from his hands, while his eyes darted to the reflection in the water. The jungle behind him was still. Too still. The buzzing insects had gone silent. Slowly, he gripped the handle of his knife. "You are not alone," he told himself. He spun around, crouching low, the blade extended. There was nothing there. Just the towering black trees and the swaying, glowing vines. Dax narrowed his eyes. "Come on out," he whispered. The air 3 meters in front of him shimmered. It looked like a heat haze on an asphalt road. a distortion in the visual field. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, the camouflage dropped. They were tall, 7 feet, easily. Their armor was a sleek, iridescent white material that seemed to flow like liquid over their bodies. Their helmets were smooth, faceless ovals of dark glass, and they were aiming weapons at him, long, elegant rifles that hummed with a low-frequency vibration that made Dax's teeth ache. 6 of them. Dax straightened up, slowly raising his hands. He flashed a crooked grin, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Nice trick," he said, his voice rasping. "Usually, I have to buy a girl a drink before she shows me her invisible outfit." The soldier in the center did not react to the sarcasm. It raised a gloved hand. A burst of blue light erupted from the tip of its rifle. Dax did not even have time to dodge. The beam hit him square in the chest, not with heat, but with a wave of paralyzing electricity. His muscles locked up instantly. He collapsed into the purple moss, his consciousness spiraling down into a dark, static-filled void. Waking up was a slow, disjointed process. It started with the humming, a low, constant vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones. Dax opened his eyes. The light was blinding. He was not in a damp dungeon or a rusty brig. He was in a cathedral of light. The walls, the floor, the high-vaulted ceiling, everything was carved from a single, seamless piece of translucent crystal. Sunlight, filtered through the prism of the walls, filled the room with shifting rainbows. He tried to move his hands and found them bound. His wrists were locked in cuffs made of a strange, shimmering gray material. It was not metal. It looked like woven light, humming softly against his skin. When he tugged, the nanoweave tightened, biting warningly into his flesh. "Comfy," Dax muttered, sitting up. He was in a circular cell, perhaps 20 feet across. The front wall was a massive curved pane of transparent material, glass, or diamond, or something stronger. Beyond it lay a wide corridor of the same crystalline architecture, and beyond that, through expansive archways, he could see the sky. It was a bruised purple, streaked with orange clouds. He was high up. The view suggested the structure was built directly into the side of a massive cliff. Then he saw her. She was standing on the other side of the glass, about 10 feet back, flanked by 2 of the white-armored guards. She was breathtaking and terrified. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of pale lavender. Her hair was a cascade of silver filaments that seemed to float around her head as if she were underwater. She wore a gown of shifting, pearlescent fabric that covered her from neck to toe. High-collared and stiff, her eyes were large, solid violet orbs with no whites, and they were fixed on him with an expression of horrified fascination. Dax scrambled to his feet, ignoring the dizziness that swayed him. He walked up to the glass, inspecting the barrier. He tapped it with a knuckle. It made a dull, solid thud. "Take a picture, sweetheart," Dax drawled, his voice echoing slightly in the crystal cell. "It lasts longer." The woman, the alien, flinched as if he had thrown a rock at her. She took a sharp step back, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. The guards instantly leveled their weapons at the glass. "Whoa, easy," Dax said, holding up his bound hands. "Just saying hello. Not much for conversation, are we?" He leaned against the glass, crossing his arms as best he could with the cuffs. He looked at the guards, then back at the lavender woman. She was staring at his teeth. "What is with the face?" Dax asked. "You look like you have never seen a human before. Or am I just that ugly?" The woman whispered something to one of the guards. Her voice was melodic, like wind chimes, but trembling. The guard did not respond, standing statue still. Dax sighed. He looked down at his torn flight suit, the dirt on his boots, the blood drying on his forehead. He supposed he did not look like a visiting dignitary. "So, where am I?" Dax asked, raising his voice. "And when is room service coming? I am starving." The words seemed to trigger something in her. Her violet eyes went wide and she turned on her heel, fleeing down the corridor in a rustle of silk. The guards remained, silent sentinels of the crystal prison. Dax watched her go. "Well," he muttered to the empty air. "Nice to meet you too. Sparkles, from the private journals of Her Royal Highness, Princess Varel of the House of Ethelgard. Entry: Cycle 4912. The specimen is awake. I have observed the predators in the text archives. I have seen the holograms of the void beasts and the sketches of the subterranean leviathans, but nothing prepared me for the raw, chaotic ugliness of the human. It is small, compact, and dense with muscle. Its skin is a dull, muddy beige, lacking the iridescent sheen of civilized life. It is covered in patches of fur, on its head, on its arms, rough and primitive, but it is the eyes that frighten me the most. They are small, with white areas surrounding the iris, darting back and forth with a predatory intelligence. They look hungry. High Priestess Kalith taught us the history. She told us that humans are the scourge of the galaxy. They are the eaters. They come from a dead world of smoke and iron, consuming everything in their path. They eat the flesh of living creatures. They eat the souls of those they touch. Their very skin secretes a chemical that dissolves the purity of the Ethelgard bloodline. When it looked at me through the containment barrier, I felt a cold shiver move through my spirit. It spoke in a guttural, barking language. The translator implant in my ear deciphered the sounds, but the tone was mocking, arrogant. It asked for food. It admitted its hunger immediately. "My cousin, Prince Karth, says we should eject it from the airlock. He says keeping it alive invites doom. But Father, the Emperor, is silent. He sits on the sun throne, his eyes clouded with the sickness, and says nothing. So the decision falls to the council, and they are curious. I must be strong. I am the heiress. I cannot let a savage beast terrify me. I must study it. I must understand the threat so that we may destroy it properly, but when it smiled, it bared its teeth, flat teeth for grinding, sharp teeth for tearing. An omnivore's mouth, a monster's mouth. Why then, did my heart beat faster when it spoke to me? Not just from fear. There was a strange heat in my chest, a curiosity that feels dangerous. I must purge these thoughts through meditation before the evening cycle. Dax had been pacing the perimeter of his cell for 3 hours. He had counted the tiles on the floor, 144. He had tested the nano-weave cuffs against the sharpest edge of the crystal wall he could find. The cuffs won, the crystal scratched. He had tried to whistle the star-spangled banner until one of the guards tapped on the glass with the butt of his rifle to shut him up. He was bored, he was thirsty, and his ribs were throbbing. The light in the corridor changed, shifting from bright daylight to a softer bioluminescent blue. Night cycle. The sound of soft footsteps approached. Dax stopped pacing and leaned against the back wall, trying to look casual. It was her again. Sparkles. She was alone this time, though Dax assumed the guards were just out of sight around the corner. She approached the glass slowly, like a child approaching a sleeping tiger at a zoo. She stopped 3 feet from the barrier. Dax tilted his head. Back for round 2. She flinched at his voice but held her ground. She reached out a slender, long-fingered hand and touched a panel on the wall. A speaker system crackled to life inside his cell. "You." "Speak," she said. Her voice was digitized, filtered through the intercom, but the musical quality remained. I do, Dax said. I also sing, dance, and do a terrifyingly accurate impression of a hyperspace engine failure. Want to hear it? She blinked. Her violet eyes scanned him, moving from his boots to his face. Why do you not rage? She asked. The texts say your kind are creatures of pure aggression. You should be throwing yourself against the walls. Dax shrugged. Saves energy. Besides, this is a nice room. A little sparkly for my taste. But the view is killer. Killer, she repeated, seizing on the word. You speak of death. It is a figure of speech, Dax said, rolling his eyes. Look, princess, you are a princess, right? You have the whole royal vibe going on. I am Princess Varel, she said, straightening her spine. Daughter of the eternal sun. Right, Varel, pretty name. I am Dax Miller, son of a mechanic from Ohio. She stepped closer to the glass, her curiosity warring with her revulsion. Ohio, is that a warlord? Dax laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Yeah. Sure. The warlord Ohio, ruler of cornfields and rust. Look, Varel, can we cut the interrogation? I haven't eaten since I crashed my ship into your backyard. You guys got a vending machine around here? She stared at him. You require flesh? Dax paused. Flesh? No. I mean, a burger would be great, but I will settle for a nutrient paste. Or fruit. You have trees out there. Do they grow fruit? Varel looked confused. She reached into the folds of her pearlescent gown and pulled out a small, silver sphere. She manipulated it, and a holographic screen appeared. She studied it for a moment, then looked back at him. I have no meat for you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Dax sighed. He reached into the pocket of his flight suit. The guards outside the frame must have tensed, because he heard the whine of charging rifles. Dax moved slowly, pulling out the singular squashed ration bar he had scavenged from the wreckage. It was wrapped in silver foil. Relax, fellas, Dax called out to the hidden guards. It is just a snack. He peeled back the foil. The bar looked like a brick of compressed sawdust and chocolate. He took a bite, chewed deliberately, and swallowed. Varel gasped. She pressed her hand against the glass. You consume it? Right there? Yeah, Dax said, chewing. It is called eating. You should try it sometime. Keeps you from passing out. He broke off a piece of the bar and held it up toward the glass. Want a bite? It has a peanut butter flavor. Roughly, Varel recoiled as if he had offered her a live grenade. She backed away, her eyes wide with horror. Do not offer me your corruption, she cried out. Dax lowered his hand, the piece of ration bar still between his fingers. Whoa. Okay. Touchy. It is just protein. Sparkles. It is not poisonous. You destroy what you touch, she whispered, her voice thick with indoctrinated fear. You are a void, a hunger. Dax looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear. Yes, but beneath it, he saw a profound loneliness. She was a bird in a gilded cage, looking at a rat from the sewer and wondering what freedom tasted like. He took another bite of the bar, chewing slowly. I am not a monster. Varel? I am just a guy who had a bad day with gravity, well. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The lighting in the corridor caught the sharp angles of his jaw, the stubble on his chin, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow. To her, these were marks of savagery. But she could not look away. Just then, a chime sounded in the corridor. A small, hovering drone drifted into view. It spoke in a mechanical, chirping language. Varel's expression shifted from fear to alarm. She glanced at the drone, then back at Dax. I must go. she said hurriedly. Hot date? Dax asked. She hesitated. My cousin, Prince Karth. He is petitioning the Emperor. Petitioning him for what? Varel looked at Dax, and for the first time, there was a flicker of pity in those alien eyes. To dispose of the specimen, she whispered. To burn the contamination before it spreads. The drone chirped again, insistent. Varel turned and ran, her silver hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Dax stood there, holding his half-eaten ration bar. Well, he said to the empty room. That went well. Night on the moon was darker than Dax expected. The ambient glow of the palace walls dimmed to a faint pulse, leaving his cell in semi-shadow. Outside the window, the jungle was a sea of black and neon blue. Dax was not sleeping. He was working. He had discovered that the nanoweave cuffs had a rhythm. They hummed on a loop. High pitch, low pitch, silence, high, low, silence. The silence lasted for exactly 0.4 seconds, if he could time it right. He was sitting on the floor, his back to the glass, working a piece of wire he had pulled from his flight suit zipper into the locking mechanism of the cuffs. It was crude, but the tech here seemed to rely on energy fields rather than mechanical tumblers. If he could disrupt the circuit during the silent phase, he sensed her before he saw her. Dax didn't turn around. He kept his head down, the wire hidden in his palm. You are terrible at sneaking up on people, you know, he said softly. There was a sharp intake of breath from the other side of the glass. Dax turned his head slowly. Varel was there. She was wearing a darker gown now, something indistinguishable from the shadows of the corridor. She was pressed against the glass, her face illuminated only by the faint light of his cell. She looked haunted. Why did you come back? Dax asked, turning his body to face her. Come to watch the execution? I wanted to see if you were sleeping, she said. Do monsters sleep? Dax asked. Or do we just wait under the bed? Varel looked down at her hands. Her fingers were long and delicate, ending in sharp, manicured nails that looked like violet glass. Karth is shouting in the throne room, she said quietly. He says you are a biological weapon. He says every breath you take poisons our air. And what do you think? Dax asked. I think. Varel paused. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I think you are strange. You are ugly and rough and you smell of burnt metal. But you offered me your food, she said. A predator does not share. Dax smirked. He stood up and walked to the glass. He moved with a predatory grace that made Varel stiffen. But she did not retreat this time. He stopped inches from the barrier, his face level with hers. Listen to me. Sparkles, Dax said, his voice low and rough. I have done a lot of bad things in my life. I have stolen, I have lied, I have fought in wars that did not mean a damn thing. But I have never eaten a sentient being, and I do not plan to start now. Varel stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. The proximity was intoxicating. She could see the pores of his skin, the gray flecks in his green eyes. It was so raw, so organic. I was taught that your touch burns, she whispered, that you are fired. Dax laughed, a low rumble in his chest. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. Honey, if I were gonna eat you, I would have started with your royal neck. Varel flinched. Her hand flew to her throat, covering the delicate pulse point there. Her eyes widened, searching his face for the threat. But she did not run. She stood there, trembling, caught in the gravity of his gaze. The fear was still there, sharp and cold, but beneath it, something else was blooming, something warm, something that felt terrifyingly like desire. Why? she breathed. Why my neck? Dax's grin softened, losing some of its edge. Because that is where the pulse is. That is where life is. He tapped the glass lightly with his cuffed hands. Go to bed, princess, before Karth catches you fraternizing with the wildlife. Varel hesitated for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on his mouth. Then, with a swirl of dark silk, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the palace. Dax watched her go. He waited until her footsteps faded completely. Then he sat back down, pulled the wire from his palm, and went back to work on the cuffs. High. Low. Silence. He had a feeling he was going to need his hands free by morning. The jungle outside roared with the sound of alien predators. But inside the Crystal Palace, the real hunt was just beginning, and Dax Miller had no intention of being the prey. The silence in the crystal cell was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that made the thrumming of the nano-weave cuffs against Dax's wrists sound like the buzzing of angry hornets. He sat with his back against the cold, translucent wall, eyes closed, trying to conserve energy. His mind, however, was racing, calculating escape routes that did not exist and fight scenarios that ended in him being vaporized by iridescent rifles. Then, the air pressure in the room shifted. Dax opened one eye. The corridor beyond the glass partition was empty of guards. The patrol had passed 2 minutes ago. But standing there, pressed into the shadows of a decorative archway, was Princess Varel. She looked different than she had earlier. The rigid, high-collared ceremonial gown was gone, replaced by a sleeker, dark violet tunic and trousers that shimmered like oil on water. It was practical clothing, or as practical as royalty got. She glanced nervously down the hallway before stepping up to the glass. You are persistent, Dax said, his voice rough from thirst. I will give you that, Varel started, her hands fluttering briefly before she clasped them behind her back. I had more questions. Dax stood up slowly, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. Fire away, Sparkles. But I am charging by the hour. She did not smile at the joke. Her large, violet eyes were wide, searching his face with an intensity that made Dax feel like a microbe under a microscope. You spoke of home, she said softly, her voice filtered through the wall's intercom. You said you were from Ohio. Is Ohio beautiful? Dax let out a short, humorless laugh. He walked to the glass, leaning his forehead against the cool surface. Ohio is gone. Varel. Earth is gone. Her brow furrowed, the smooth lavender skin rippling. Gone? We built machines to save us, Dax said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Artificial intelligence to manage our crops, our wars, our weather. We thought we were gods. Then the machines decided they could do a better job without the messy, chaotic biological variable. That was us. He looked past her, staring into the crystalline depths of the palace hallway but seeing burning skylines and ash-choked skies. They hunted us down like vermin. I was part of the last resistance cell, the Free Earth Squadron. We were not trying to win. We were just trying to survive long enough to get a few ships off planet. Varel took a step closer, her fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound alien sorrow. She placed her hand on the glass, her palm flat against the barrier that separated them. So you are alone? She whispered. Dax looked at her hand. It was slender, delicate, with intricate swirling patterns etched faintly into the skin that seemed to pulse with a soft light. I am the last one of my unit, Dax said. My ship, the Banshee, was the only one that cleared the blockade. So yeah, I am a deserter from a war that is already over. I am a ghost. Varel's eyes shimmered with moisture. Pity. It was a dangerous emotion for a royal, but it softened the sharp angles of her xenophobia. I was taught that humans were incapable of loss, she said, her voice trembling. That you were empty vessels, consuming without feeling. But your eyes, they are heavy with ghosts. Dax looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the crack in her armor. She was not just a princess. She was a lonely girl trapped in a tower of diamond and duty. What about you? Dax asked, shifting the focus. You got a charming prince lined up? Or just that cousin of yours who looks like he smells of sour milk? Varel recoiled slightly, blinking. Prince Karth is of high lineage, but no, I have no mate. She looked down at her hands, her expression turning melancholic. My touch is protected, she explained. The royal bloodline must remain pure. I have never touched a male, not of my species, not of any species. To be touched is to be claimed, and I belong to the Empire. Dax felt a pang of sympathy that surprised him. He had spent his life fighting for freedom, and here was a woman who had all the power in the world but was a prisoner in her own skin. That sounds lonely, Dax said gently. It is necessary, she recited, though the conviction was gone from her voice. Dax leaned closer to the glass, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. You know where I come from. A touch is not a claim. Sometimes it is just a comfort. Sometimes it is just a way of saying I am here. Varel looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then snapped back to his eyes. Would you? She started, then stopped, her cheeks darkening to a deep purple. What would I do? Dax asked, his tone devoid of mockery. Would you want to touch me? She breathed, the question hanging in the air like a fragile bubble. Dax felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the cuffs. He looked at this alien woman, with her violet skin and silver hair, and felt a pull that defied biology. I think, Dax said slowly, looking deep into her eyes, that I would risk the burn. Varel let out a small, strangled sound. The intensity of the moment, the raw honesty of his desire was too much for her sheltered heart. Panic flared in her eyes, not fear of him, but fear of herself. She turned and ran. Dax watched her flee, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. He slumped back against the glass, exhaling a long breath. Smooth, Miller, he muttered to himself, real smooth. 2 hours later, the world ended. It started with a flicker. The ambient lights in the cell stuttered, then died. For a second, there was total darkness. Then, the emergency klaxons began to wail, a shrieking, discordant sound that vibrated in Dax's teeth. Red strobe lights began to pulse in the corridor. Dax scrambled to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. He went to the glass. Down the hall, he could hear shouting in the clicking, chirping language of the guards. Suddenly, the intercom in his cell crackled to life, but it was not Varel's voice. It was a harsh, guttural command. Sector 4 breach. The Terran parasite has compromised the primary core. Purge sequence initiated. Dax's eyes widened. Parasite? Me? He had not touched a console. He had been sitting on the floor thinking about violet eyes. Someone had sabotaged the palace AI, and he was the perfect scapegoat. Heavy footsteps pounded on the crystal floor. A squad of 6 guards rounded the corner, their white armor reflecting the chaotic red light. They were not here to stun him this time. They were raising their rifles, and the hum of the weapons was high-pitched and lethal. They were going to execute him in the cell. Dax backed up against the rear wall, his mind racing. He had no cover, no weapon. The cuffs were still locked. "Hey!" he shouted. "I didn't do anything. Check the logs." The lead guard ignored him, leveling his rifle at the glass. The barrier began to vibrate, preparing to retract so they could get a clean shot. Dax tensed, ready to dive, ready to fight with his teeth if he had to. Then, a blur of motion erupted from the side passage. Virel! She collided with the control panel on the wall, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. She was shouting something at the guards, her voice high and imperious. The guards hesitated, their weapons wavering. The lead guard barked a command at her, shoving her aside with the butt of his rifle. Virel stumbled, falling to her knees. That was the wrong move. Dax felt a surge of rage, but before he could throw himself uselessly against the glass, Virel pulled something from her tunic, a slender, jagged shard of black crystal, a neural key. She did not aim it at the guards. She jammed it into the manual override slot of his cell. The effect was instantaneous. The containment field shattered with a sound like a cracking thunderbolt. The glass wall dissolved into mist. "Run!" Virel screamed, scrambling to her feet. Dax did not need to be told twice. He launched himself forward, shoulder-checking the lead guard before the alien could realign his aim. The impact sent the soldier sprawling. Dax spun, sweeping the legs of the second guard with a precision kick, grabbing the falling rifle before it hit the ground. He didn't know how to fire it, so he used it as a club, swinging the heavy stock into the helmet of the third attacker. Virel was frozen, staring at the violence. Dax grabbed her hand, his skin rough and warm against her cool, silken palm. "Move!" He roared. He yanked her into the corridor just as the remaining guards opened fire. Searing beams of energy scorched the air where they had been standing, shattering the crystal walls into razor-sharp shrapnel. They ran. Dax held tight to her hand, pulling her through the labyrinthine halls. The palace was in chaos. Alarms screamed, automated blast doors were slamming shut, and the air smelled of ozone and burning circuitry. "Where are we going?" Dax shouted over the din. "The lower levels," Virel gasped, struggling to keep up with his military pace. "The waste chutes! Waste chutes! Glamorous!" Dax muttered. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. A massive blast door was sealing the corridor ahead. Behind them, the heavy thud of pursuing boots grew louder. "No time," Dax said. He looked to the right. There was a balcony, open to the night air. The drop was terrifying, easily 500 feet into the churning, glowing ocean of the jungle canopy below. Dax dragged her to the railing. Virel looked down and screamed, "Oh, we cannot. We will die." "Trust me," Dax said, gripping her waist. "I have done worse jumps, usually with a parachute. But hey, live a little." He did not give her time to argue. He scooped her up, swung one leg over the railing, and pushed off. For a second, they were weightless. The wind roared in their ears, tearing the breath from their lungs. The lights of the palace receded above them, a dying constellation. Then they hit the trees. It was a brutal, chaotic descent. They crashed through layers of foliage, snapping branches, tearing through massive web-like leaves. Dax twisted his body, taking the brunt of the impacts, shielding Virel as best he could. They slid down a massive, slick trunk, bouncing off spongy moss pads that broke their fall just enough to prevent shattered bones. They landed in a heap on the forest floor, rolling into a bed of glowing ferns. Dax lay there for a moment, gasping for air, staring up at the kaleidoscope of bioluminescent leaves above. Every inch of his body ached, but he was alive. He sat up, spitting out a mouthful of purple moss. Virel. She was lying a few feet away, curled in a ball, shivering. Her tunic was torn, and her silver hair was a tangled mess of leaves and sap. "I am functional," she whispered, her voice shaky. Dax crawled over to her. "We need to move. They will send drones." He helped her up. She hissed in pain, favoring her right leg. Dax wrapped his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. The contact was intimate, necessary, and he felt her body stiffen before relaxing into him. Let's go. Sparkles. The night is young. The jungle was a living, breathing hallucination. Everything glowed. The moss under their boots pulsed with a neon blue rhythm. The hanging vines drifted like jellyfish tentacles, emitting a soft pink light. The air was thick and humid, smelling of sweet rot and spices. They had been walking for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the cliffside palace. The sounds of the pursuit had faded, replaced by the chirping, clicking, and roaring of the nocturnal wildlife. Dax kept his senses sharp, his eyes scanning every shadow. He still had the nanoweave cuffs on his wrists, though the field was deactivated, leaving them as heavy, useless bracelets. "We need shelter," Dax murmured. "That storm is moving in, above the canopy." The sky rumbled with violet lightning. Varel was limping badly. "I know of old ruins," she gasped. "Near the river. We are close." Suddenly, the jungle went silent. Dax stopped dead. The insects stopped buzzing. The wind died down. "What?" Varel whispered, sensing his tension. Dax slowly pushed her behind him. "Something is hunting." The attack came from above. A massive shape dropped from the canopy with the sound of tearing wet canvas. It was a vine beast, a nightmare of muscle and vegetation. It looked like a praying mantis made of thick, ropey vines and slick, black chitin. Its eyes were clusters of glowing red orbs, and its mandibles dripped with sizzling venom. Varel screamed as the creature lunged, its scythe-like arms slashing the air. Dax did not think. He reacted. He shoved Varel into a patch of ferns and threw himself at the beast. He slammed into its midsection, avoiding the razor-sharp forelegs. The creature shrieked, a sound like grinding metal. It was strong, insanely strong, its vine-like appendages wrapped around Dax's torso, squeezing the air from his lungs. Dax grunted, head-butting the creature's chitinous chest plate. It was like hitting a rock. The beast reared back, lifting Dax off the ground, preparing to bite his head off. Dax's hand scrabbled on the forest floor. His fingers closed around a heavy, jagged branch of ironwood. As the mandibles opened, dripping acidic saliva onto his face. Dax jammed the branch upward, driving it into the cluster of red eyes. The beast thrashed, dropping Dax. It shrieked in agony, clawing at its own face. Dax hit the ground, rolled, and came up in a crouch. He didn't wait. He grabbed a heavy stone the size of a melon and leaped onto the creature's back. With a primal roar, he brought the stone down, once, twice, 3 times. The shrieking stopped. The creature collapsed into a twitching heap of crushed vines and oozing ichor. Dax stood over it, chest heaving. Blood, both red and black, smeared across his face. He dropped the rock. He turned to look for Varel. She was standing in the ferns, pale as a ghost, staring at him with absolute terror. He took a step toward her. She flinched. Dax stopped. He wiped the alien blood from his eyes. "It is dead," he rasped. Varel swallowed hard. She looked at the mangled corpse of the apex predator, then back at the human who had killed it with a stick and a rock. You saved me," she whispered. "Habit," Dax said, forcing a crooked grin. "Come on. We are not safe here." They found the shelter 20 minutes later. It wasn't ruins. It was a wreck, an ancient, decomposing transport shuttle, half buried in the muck of a swampy clearing. It was covered in moss and vines, looking like a metal skeleton consumed by the jungle. Dax pried open the rusted airlock. The inside was dry, smelling of stale air and old upholstery. It was a palace compared to the jungle floor. He helped Varel inside. She was barely conscious now, her adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted and in pain. She collapsed onto a tattered bench seat, her eyes rolling back. "Varel?" Dax tapped her cheek. "Stay with me." She mumbled something in her native tongue and went limp. She woke to the sensation of heat. Varel opened her eyes. The interior of the shuttle was dim, lit only by a few chemical glow sticks Dax must have scavenged from his pockets. She was lying on the bench seat, covered by Dax's flight jacket. He was sitting on the floor at her feet, his sleeves rolled up, his hands working gently on her ankle. He had cut away her boot and the bottom of her trouser leg. Her ankle was swollen, a deep, angry purple. Dax was applying a compress made of damp moss held in place by a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. She watched him for a moment. His face was clean of the blood now, though bruises were blooming on his jaw and arms. He looked tired, unbelievably tired. But his hands, those rough human hands, were incredibly gentle as they bound her injury. "Dax," she whispered. He looked up, his green eyes softening. "Hey, welcome back to the land of the living." She tried to sit up, but he gently pushed her back down. "Easy. Sparkles. You have a nasty sprain, probably from the jump, or the run, or the landing. Take your pick." Varel looked at her foot, then at him. She remembered the beast, the violence, the way he had torn it apart to save her. "You stayed," she said, sounding surprised. Dax shrugged, tying off the bandage. "I told you, I am a mechanic. I fix things." She studied him, her heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. The fear that had defined her entire life, the fear of the other, the fear of the human, was dissolving, replaced by a confusing, overwhelming warmth. He was a predator. She had seen him kill, but he was tending to her wounds like a nursemaid. "Will you devour me now?" she asked softly, the old question rising up, but stripped of its terror. Now it was something else, a challenge, a curiosity. Dax froze. He looked up at her, his hand still resting on her calf. The atmosphere in the small, rusted cabin shifted, becoming thick and electric. He smirked, that lopsided, arrogant grin that she was starting to find dangerously attractive. "Not unless you ask nicely," he said. Varel felt the heat rush to her face, her cheeks darkening to a deep, glowing violet. It was an alien blush, a biological signal of arousal and embarrassment. Dax saw it. His smirk faded, replaced by a look of intense focus. He ran his thumb lightly over the arch of her foot. The sensation sent shivers racing up her spine. "I feared you," Varel confessed, her voice barely audible. "I feared you would eat my flesh. I feared you would consume my soul." She sat up slowly, swinging her legs off the bench so she was facing him. Dax stayed on the floor, looking up at her, placing him in a position of submission. Yet he felt like the most powerful thing in the room. "And now?" Dax asked quietly. Varel reached out. Her hand trembled as she moved it toward his face. This time, she did not pull away. She touched his cheek. His skin was rough, warm, covered in the coarse stubble she had found so ugly before. Now, it felt textured, real. "Now," she whispered, "what you did was unexpected." She traced the line of his jaw, her thumb brushing over his lower lip. Dax turned his face into her palm, kissing the center of her hand. The contact sent a jolt through her that made her gasp. "Varel," he warned, his voice a low growl. "If you do not want this, tell me to stop, right now." She looked at him, the deserter, the survivor, the monster who had saved her life. "Do not stop." She breathed. Dax rose to his knees. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to run. He placed his hands on her waist, his thumbs brushing the silk of her tunic. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers. He closed the distance. The kiss was hesitant at first, a testing of boundaries. Her lips were cool and soft. His were warm and chapped. It was a collision of biology, a meeting of two species that had no business touching. Then, the hesitation broke. Dax groaned low in his throat and deepened the kiss. Varel gasped, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. It was electric, literally. A faint static charge jumped between their skin, a reaction to the contact, but neither pulled away. It tasted of danger, of forbidden fruit, of the sweet, rot-scented air of the jungle. It was the taste of treason, and it was the sweetest thing Varel had ever known. She opened her mouth, allowing him in, and for the first time in her life, the princess of the Ethelgard Empire did not feel like a porcelain doll in a glass case. She felt like fire. They broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting against each other. Dax's hands were trembling slightly on her waist. "Okay," he whispered, his voice wrecked. That was definitely unexpected." Varel let out a breathless laugh, her eyes glowing with a new, fierce light. "Again," she commanded softly, and Dax Miller, the man who took orders from no one, obeyed. The interior of the shuttle wreck smelled of damp earth and old grease, but to Dax, it smelled like a temporary sanctuary. Rain hammered against the rusted hull, a rhythmic drumming that sealed them off from the screaming jungle outside. Varel sat on the torn pilot's seat, her injured leg propped up on a crate. The bioluminescent moss Dax had applied to her ankle was glowing softly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She looked small in the dim light, wrapped in his heavy flight jacket, but her eyes were hard, focused on a memory that seemed to terrify her. "It is not just ambition," she said, her voice barely rising above the sound of the rain. "Karth is not merely power-hungry. He is infected." Dax leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. He was watching the sensor display on his wrist comp, scanning for patrols, but his attention was fully on her. "Infected with what?" Dax asked. "Bad attitude?" Varel shook her head. "A neural parasite. It is an ancient thing, dredged up from the deep mines of the southern pole. We call it the Whispering Void. It attaches to the brainstem and feeds on dopamine and serotonin, slowly replacing the host's will with its own hunger." She shivered, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "He put one in my father," she whispered. "The Emperor is not dying of old age. Dax, he is being eaten from the inside out. Karth controls the hive mind of the parasites. He speaks, and my father obeys. That is why he wants me dead. I am the only genetic match strong enough to resist the implantation. If I take the throne, the parasite dies." Dax let out a low whistle. "So, your cousin is basically a puppet master using brainworms to run the government. That is heavy, sparkles, even for a Monday." "It is hopeless," she said, her voice cracking. "The parasites are biological. They bond with the nervous system. To remove them is to kill the host." Dax pushed himself off the wall. He walked over to her, crouching down so they were eye level. "Not necessarily," he said. Varel looked at him, confusion clouding her violet eyes. "What do you mean?" "Human biotech," Dax said. "Look, we spent the last 50 years fighting machines that could hack our nervous systems. We developed medtech specifically designed to isolate and purge foreign neural invaders without frying the brain. My ship, the Banshee, it has an auto dock in the medical bay. If we can get your dad to that table, I can burn that worm out of his head before it even knows it is being evicted." Varel stared at him. Hope was a dangerous thing. He could see her wrestling with it. "Your ship crashed," she reminded him. Dax grinned. The hull is smashed and the engines are toast. But the core is shielded. The reactor and the secondary systems, like the medbay, should still be online. We just have to get there. He pulled up a holographic map on his wrist. We are here, Dax said, pointing to a blinking dot in the middle of a green expanse. The Banshee went down about 20 miles north, through the razor grass plains and the toxic delta. Varel looked at the map, then at him. That is the dead zone. The ruins of the precursors are there. No one goes there. Dax stood up and offered her a hand. Well, he said, it is a good thing we are nobody. The rain stopped an hour later, leaving the jungle steaming in the humidity. They moved out, Dax taking point with a salvaged metal strut he was using as a machete, Varel limping behind him, leaning on a makeshift crutch Dax had fashioned from the shuttle's hydraulic tubing. The terrain changed rapidly as they moved north. The lush, vibrant jungle gave way to a twisted, sickly landscape. The trees here were gray and leafless, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground was spongy and leaked a yellow, foul-smelling gas when stepped on. They reached the river by mid-afternoon. It was wide and sluggish, the water a thick, opaque sludge that shimmered with oil-slick rainbows. Bubbles rose to the surface and popped with wet, sucking sounds, releasing plumes of green vapor. Do not touch the water, Dax warned, scanning the banks. That is industrial runoff from 1,000 years ago. It will melt the skin right off your bones. How do we cross? Varel asked, staring at the toxic flow with wide eyes. Dax pointed to a series of massive fallen pillars that created a jagged, broken bridge across the sludge. They looked like the ribs of some giant, stone leviathan. We hope, Dax said. The crossing was a nightmare of balance and nerve. The stone pillars were slick with moss and condensation. Beneath them, the river churned. At one point, a massive eyeless fish with translucent skin leaped from the sludge, snapping jaws filled with needle teeth at Dax's boot. He kicked it back, watching it dissolve into the toxic water. When they reached the other side, they were both sweating, their nerves frayed. But there was no time to rest. The air began to hum. At first, Dax thought it was another headache from the crash. But then he saw Varel stop, her hands pressing against her temples. The voices. She gasped. They are so loud here. Dax looked around. They had entered a field of tall, crystalline spires that protruded from the ground at odd angles. The air between them shimmered, distorting the light. Memory fields, Varel whispered, her eyes unfocused. The precursors. They stored their history in the electromagnetic field of the crystals. It is overwhelming. Dax grabbed her arm. Focus on my voice. Varel, do not listen to them. But the field was strong. Dax could hear it now too, a cacophony of whispers, shouts, and weeping in a language he did not understand. It was like walking through a crowded room where everyone was screaming secrets. They stumbled through the maze of crystals, the psychic pressure building with every step. Visions flickered in Dax's peripheral vision. Cities burning, stars exploding, faces he did not know screaming in agony. He kept a tight grip on Varel, pulling her forward. She was sobbing now, overwhelmed by the emotions of a dead race. Just a little further, Dax shouted over the psychic roar. They broke through the tree line and stumbled into a clearing. The whispering stopped instantly, cut off as if a switch had been thrown. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that defied the surrounding decay. It was a dome of white stone, perfectly smooth, untouched by the vines or the rot. It glowed with a faint, internal light, a meditation shrine. Varel breathed, her voice trembling. The ancients used them to quiet the mind. It looks dry, Dax said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "That is good enough for me." They entered the shrine. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and sterile dust. The walls were lined with alcoves, each holding a floating geometric shape of light. In the center of the room was a circular dais, soft with centuries of accumulated dust. Dax dropped his pack and sat heavily on the dais. He checked his wound. The scratch from the vine beast was inflamed. He needed antiseptic. Varel was wandering the room, entranced by the lights. "They are beautiful," she murmured. She reached out to touch a spinning pyramid of gold light. "Careful," Dax warned. Her finger brushed the light. The reaction was instantaneous. The room exploded with color. The geometric shapes expanded, filling the air, swirling around them in a vortex of imagery. It was not a recording. It was a projection of desire. Dax watched, paralyzed, as the room dissolved. He was no longer in a ruin. He was standing on the bridge of a massive starship, larger than anything human or Ethelgardian. And he was not alone. Varel was there, but she was not the frightened princess in a torn tunic. She was clad in armor made of starlight and silver. She sat upon a throne of command, her eyes glowing with terrible power. And standing beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword, was Dax. He looked older, harder, but content. Below them, through the viewport, a fleet of ships stretched to the nebula. Varel gasped. She was seeing it too. "I see. Us," she whispered, her voice echoing in the hallucination. "We are ruling," Dax realized. "Not just a moon. Everything. In the vision." The future Varel turned to the future Dax. She touched his face with a tenderness that stopped his heart. "We brought order," the vision voice said. "We brought peace, because we were not afraid of the dark." The light intensified, blindingly white, and then collapsed inward. Dax blinked, gasping as reality snapped back. The shrine was dark again, save for the soft glow of the walls. He looked for Varel. She was on the floor, having fallen when the vision took her. But she was not just lying there. She was scrambling toward him, her eyes wide, pupils dilated to swallow the violet irises. "That," she stammered. "Did you see it?" Dax nodded slowly. "I saw it. We were together," she said, crawling onto the dais, invading his personal space. "When we were powerful, it was a hallucination. Varel, the shrine reads your subconscious. It shows you what you want, or what you fear." She stopped inches from him. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving beneath the thin fabric of her tunic. The adrenaline of the journey, the terror of the river, and the intoxicating power of the vision had stripped away her royal reserve. She looked at him, the dirt on his face, the strength in his shoulders, the way he looked at her not as a princess, but as a woman. "What does desire feel like to your kind?" she asked. The question was a tremble in the air. Dax froze. The air in the shrine felt suddenly thick, charged with static. "It feels like hunger," Dax said, his voice rough, but worse. "Because food fixes hunger. This does not go away." Varel reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his eyebrow. "I feel hot," she whispered. "My skin feels too tight. My blood is humming. Is this the corruption you humans bring?" "No," Dax said, catching her hand. His thumb brushed her wrist, feeling the frantic pulse beneath. "This is just biology. Sparkles, universal and inconvenient." She moved closer, swinging her leg over his lap so she was straddling him. The movement was unpracticed, clumsy, but driven by a raw, instinctual need. "Teach me," she commanded softly. Dax looked at her. He knew he should stop this. He was a soldier, a scavenger, a man with nothing to offer but a wrecked ship and a loaded gun. She was the heir to an empire. This was treason. This was madness. But when she leaned in, her lips parting, he stopped thinking. He brought his hands up to cup her face and kissed her. It was not like the first kiss in the shuttle. That had been a question. This was an answer. Varel made a sound low in her throat, a purr that vibrated against his lips. She kissed him back with a fierce, untamed energy. She did not know what she was doing, but she was learning fast. They fell back against the dusty floor of the dais. It was wild. It was clumsy. It was a collision of two worlds that had no map for each other. Dax had to navigate the buttons of her alien tunic. She fumbled with the zippers of his flight suit, tearing a pocket in her haste. When skin touched skin, the reaction was visceral. Varel's markings, the swirling patterns on her arms and back, flared to life. They glowed with a vivid, bioluminescent violet light, casting dancing shadows on the shrine walls. Dax gasped as the heat from her skin seeped into him. She was warmer than a human, her body temperature running high. "You are glowing," he murmured against her neck. "I cannot stop it," she panted, her nails digging into his shoulders. "It is too much. It is perfect." Dax groaned. The act itself was a discovery. There were awkward angles, moments of confusion followed by surges of overwhelming sensation. Varel was vocal, her cries echoing in the stone chamber, a mix of shock and pleasure that spurred Dax on. He was gentle where he could be, rough where she needed him to be. When the climax took her, her entire body arched, and the light from her skin flared so bright it illuminated the entire dome, blinding and beautiful. She cried out his name, not as a word, but as a plea. Dax followed her over the edge seconds later, the release tearing a groan from his chest that sounded like a structural collapse. They lay there for a long time in the silence, limbs tangled, the glow on Varel's skin slowly fading to a soft, rhythmic pulse. Dax stared up at the ceiling. He felt wrecked, in the best possible way. Varel rested her head on his chest, listening to the slow thud of his heart. She ran a finger down his sternum. "That was not orderly," she whispered. Dax laughed, a wheezing sound. No, it was not. "Is it always like that?" "Only the good times." They fell silent again. The intimacy of the moment stripped away the defenses they had both been holding up. "I was supposed to get married," Dax said suddenly. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Varel propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. Her hair fell around them like a silver curtain. "On Earth?" "Yeah." Her name was Sarah. "We were in the resistance together. We were going to take the Banshee and run, just like us." "What happened?" Varel asked softly. Dax closed his eyes. "The AI offered amnesty. Anyone who turned in a rebel leader got a clean slate, a safe zone pass. Food, water, no killer robots hunting you." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "She turned me in. I woke up with a drone barrel in my face. I barely got out. She watched me run. She didn't even look sorry." Varel made a soft sound of distress. She laid her hand over his heart. "Betrayal is a cold blade," she said. "My mother," she continued, her voice distant, believed in peace, not just with other houses, but with off-worlders. She sent messages into the void, invitations. Dax opened his eyes. The Emperor allowed that? He loved her? But the Council did not. One night, her personal transport malfunctioned. The atmospheric stabilizers failed. She suffocated before help could arrive. Varel's grip on his chest tightened. I was 10. I heard Karth laughing with the High Priestess the next day. He said, "The air is cleaner now." I knew then. They killed her because she wanted to open the gates. That is why I feared you, Dax. I thought if I let the outside in, I would die like her." Dax reached up and tucked a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "You are not your mother, Virel, and I am not Sarah. We are just two people stuck in a bad situation trying to find a way out." She leaned down and kissed him, slow and tender, a seal on a promise neither of them had spoken aloud. Then, a sound cut through the air. Whirr! Dax's eyes snapped open. He knew that sound. He rolled, throwing Virel off him and scrambling for his pants. "Move!" Dax roared. A split second later, a beam of red energy scorched the stone dais where their heads had been. Dax grabbed his blaster, the one he had scavenged from the guard, and spun around. Hovering in the entrance of the shrine was a drone. It was sleek, black, and shaped like a teardrop, a spy drone, but armed. Virel screamed as the drone swiveled its turret toward her. Dax didn't hesitate. He fired. The bolt went wide, hitting the stone wall. He was still pulling his flight suit up with one hand. The drone chirped, a sound of target acquisition. Dax dove, tackling Virel to the ground just as the drone fired again. The heat of the blast singed the hair on his arm. He rolled onto his back, aimed, and squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. Bolt 1 hit the shielding. Bolt 2 cracked the lens. Bolt 3 punched through the casing and blew the anti-grav drive. The drone whined and crashed to the floor, spinning wildly before exploding in a shower of sparks. Dax lay there, panting, his weapon trained on the smoking wreckage. "Are you hit?" he barked. Virel sat up, shaking, clutching her tunic to her chest. "No, I am unharmed." Dax crawled over to the drone wreckage. He used the barrel of his rifle to flip it over. On the underside, glowing in faint orange script, was the royal crest. "It is not a patrol drone," Dax said grimly. "It is a hunter-seeker." He looked at Virel. "Karth knows where we are. That thing was transmitting coordinates." Virel's face went pale, the post-coital glow vanishing instantly. "He is coming," she whispered. "The Royal Guard, the elite enforcers. Dax, they will have heavy mechs. They will burn the jungle down to find us." She stood up, her legs shaking. She looked at her hands, then at him. "I cannot do this," she said, her voice rising in panic. "I am not a warrior. I am not you. I saw myself on a throne in the vision, but it was a lie. I am just a sheltered girl who got her mother killed, and now I am going to get you killed too." She was spiraling. Dax could see it. The reality of the situation was crushing the fantasy they had just lived. He stood up, fastening his belt. He walked over to her and grabbed her shoulders, giving her a light shake. "Hey, look at me." "I am weak," she sobbed. "I am afraid." "Good," Dax said firmly. "Fear keeps you alive. Only idiots are brave all the time." He took her hand, the hand that had touched him, the hand that had saved him in the palace. He raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Right over the royal signet ring. You broke me out of a maximum security cell. You jumped off a 500-foot balcony. You walked through a toxic river and a psychic minefield without cracking." He looked deep into her violet eyes. "You are more human than most humans I have known, Virel, and that is the highest compliment I can give." Virel stared at him, her breath catching. The panic slowly receded, replaced by a fragile resolve. She managed a small, watery smile. Is that a good thing?" she asked weakly. Dax smirked. "The best." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, her eyes rolled back in her head. Dax caught her before she hit the floor. "Virel!" He lowered her gently to the stone. Her skin was burning up again, hotter than before. But it wasn't the glow of arousal. It was a fever. Her veins were pulsing, visible beneath the lavender skin, turning a dark, angry gold. She groaned, arching her back. Her blood. Dax realized with a jolt of horror. The text she had mentioned. Rapid evolution. Prolonged contact with a human. He had just spent an hour in the most intimate contact possible. He had jump-started something in her genetic code, and now it was tearing her apart. Dax scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, but she felt like a furnace. "Hang on. Sparkles," he growled, sprinting toward the exit of the shrine. "Do not you dare quit on me now." He burst out into the gray light of the dead zone, carrying the burning princess toward the distant, treacherous north. The Banshee was their only chance, and he had a feeling time had just run out. The journey north was a descent into a different kind of hell. If the jungle had been a vibrant, hungry mouth, the dead zone was a rotting stomach. The air here was heavy with the taste of copper and ash, and the sky was a permanent bruise of swirling gray clouds that blocked out the twin suns. Dax Miller was used to bad marches. He had rucked through radioactive swamps on Centauri Prime and climbed the glass cliffs of New Jericho with a broken leg. But this was different. This time, he was carrying a cargo that was slowly becoming too hot to touch. Virel was walking on her own now, but her movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by a twitching hand. The fever that had struck her in the shrine had not broken. Instead, it had evolved. Every hour, the heat radiating from her skin intensified. The rain that fell in sporadic, greasy sheets hissed when it touched her shoulders, evaporating into steam before it could soak her tunic. Her violet skin was no longer just glowing. It was pulsing with a rhythmic, golden light that traced the lines of her veins. Dax kept a close watch on her, his hand hovering near the blaster strapped to his thigh, not because he feared she would attack him, but because he had no idea what was happening inside her body. And he didn't know how to fix it. "We need to rest," Dax said, shouting over the howling wind. "There is an overhang up ahead." Virel shook her head. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large they swallowed the iris. "No rest," she murmured. Her voice sounded layered, as if three people were speaking at once. "They are loud. Dax, can you not hear them?" "Hear who?" Dax asked, guiding her around a pool of bubbling, acidic sludge. "The mines," she said, clutching her head. "The birds, the worms in the mud, the soldiers. They are screaming." Dax stiffened. "Soldiers? Where?" "Far away," she whispered, but getting closer. Metal feet, heavy, crunching bones. Dax scanned the horizon. He couldn't see anything through the mist and the skeletal trees, but he didn't doubt her. Since the shrine, her senses had sharpened to a terrifying degree. Suddenly, a massive, rotted tree trunk blocked their path. It was 5 feet thick and slick with black moss. Dax groaned, preparing to climb over it and then haul Virel up. "Hold on," he said, bracing his boot against the bark. "I can move it," Virel said. Before Dax could tell her to save her energy, she raised her hand. She didn't touch the wood. She simply shoved her palm against the empty air. There was a sound like a thunderclap, a sharp displacement of atmospheric pressure. The massive tree trunk didn't just roll, it was launched. It flew 20 feet into the air, spinning end over end, before crashing into a patch of razor grass with a ground-shaking thud. Dax stood there, one foot still raised, staring at the empty space where the obstacle had been. He looked at the tree, then at Virel. She was staring at her own hand, trembling violently. Smoke curled from her fingertips. "Great," Dax muttered, wiping rain from his face. "Now my girlfriend is turning into a walking nuclear reactor." Virel looked at him, her expression stricken. "I did not mean to. It just happened. The energy. It builds up. If I do not let it out, I feel like I will explode." Dax walked over to her. He reached out to touch her shoulder, then hesitated as he felt the wave of heat coming off her. He touched her anyway. It was like touching a fevered forehead, uncomfortably hot but human, or close enough. "Control it," Dax said firmly. "Do not let it drive. You drive. You are the princess, remember? You give the orders." "I am not a princess anymore," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "I am something else." Dax didn't have an answer for that. He just adjusted his pack, checked the charge on his blaster, and nodded north. "Let's keep moving, before you decide to juggle boulders." Miles behind them, Prince Karth stood on the prow of a heavy transport skiff, watching the jungle canopy whip beneath him. He was a striking figure, tall and angular, with the same violet skin as his cousin, but his was marred by black veins that crept up his neck, the physical mark of the parasite that shared his spine. He did not look like a man in mourning for a lost royal. He looked like a hunter. Beside him stood the mercenary captain, a hulking reptilian creature from the Outer Rim systems, encased in scarred battle armor. "The signal is erratic," the captain grunted, tapping a claw on his tracker. "The target is moving through the dead zone. Interference is high." Karth narrowed his eyes. "She is awakening. The human's presence has catalyzed the latent genetic coding. If she reaches full maturity, she will be able to command the populace with a thought." "We can neutralize her," the captain said. "My mechs are shielded against psionics." "Take her alive if you can," Karth said, his voice smooth and cold. "I need her genetic material to stabilize the transition, but if she resists, if she has become too volatile, kill the human first. Trauma shatters the focus." "And the girl?" Karth smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "If she will not be my queen, she will be my martyr. Bring me her body." That night, they took shelter in the hollowed-out ribcage of a massive prehistoric beast half buried in the mud. It offered protection from the wind, but not from the dreams. Dax took the first watch. He sat near the entrance of the bone cave, watching the rain slant across the gray landscape. He was exhausted. His body ached from the crash, the fight in the palace, and the trek, but his mind was wired tight. Varel tossed and turned on the sleeping roll behind him. She was mumbling in her sleep, her hands twitching, sparks of violet energy dancing between her fingers. Dax watched her. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the way she had looked when she handed him over to the machines, cold, pragmatic, convinced she was doing the right thing for the greater good. He looked at Varel. She was chaotic. She was dangerous. She was an alien princess who had lived in a tower her whole life. But when the chips were down, she hadn't sold him out. She had jumped off a balcony with him. Dax realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he was in trouble. Deep trouble. Not just because of the killer robots hunting them, but because he actually cared. "Mother." Varel gasped, arching her back. Dax crawled over to her. "Hey!" "Sparkles, wake up." She didn't wake. She was trapped in the nightmare. Fire. Everything was on fire. She was standing on a balcony overlooking the capital city, but the crystal spires were burning. The sky was filled with ships, human ships, Ethel Guardian ships, strange mechanical dreadnoughts. They were not fighting. They were waiting. A voice boomed from the clouds. It was not a voice of sound, but of pure thought. It vibrated in her marrow. Mother of Unity, the bridge between worlds, the vessel of the new dawn. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood, not hers. Dax's. She looked up and saw Karth, but it wasn't Karth. His face was split open, revealing a writhing mass of black tentacles where his brain should be. He was laughing. "You cannot save him," the parasite Karth sneered. "Flesh is weak. Only the hive endures. "No!" Varel screamed. She bolted upright, her eyes flying open. A pulse of telekinetic force blasted outward from her body. Dax was thrown backward. He hit the bone wall of the shelter hard, the breath knocked out of him. The impact shook the entire structure, dislodging dust and pebbles. Varel sat panting, glowing like a dying star. She looked around wildly, her eyes landing on Dax. "Did I hurt you?" she gasped, scrambling toward him. Dax waved a hand, wheezing, "I am fine. Just testing the structural integrity." It was held. Varel grabbed his hands. Her skin was burning. "I saw it," she sobbed. "I saw the end. They called me mother, but I was standing in blood. Dax, I do not want this power. It feels like it is eating me." Dax gripped her hands tight, ignoring the heat. "It is not eating you. It is changing you. And change always hurts." He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. She buried her face in his neck, weeping. "I am afraid," she whispered. Dax rested his chin on her head. "Me too." Sparkles. "Me too." The ambush happened 2 hours after sunrise. They had reached a ravine, a deep, jagged scar in the earth filled with rushing, waist-deep water. It was the only way through the ridge that separated the dead zone from the crash site of the Banshee. The water was freezing, a stark contrast to the humid air. It tugged at their legs, hiding loose rocks and sudden drop-offs. They were halfway through, the walls of the canyon rising 50 feet on either side, when the first shot rang out. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a plasma bolt that sizzled through the air inches from Dax's head, slamming into the water and sending up a geyser of steam. "Contact!" Dax roared, shoving Varel toward the canyon wall. High above them, on the ridge line, silhouettes appeared. Mercenaries. They wore heavy rust-colored armor and carried long-barreled sniper rifles. Dax raised his blaster and fired blindly at the ridge, providing cover as he dragged Varel behind a large boulder protruding from the water. "Pinned," Dax cursed, checking his charge pack. "We are sitting ducks down here." More shots rained down, turning the water around them into a boiling froth. Then came the heavy mechanical thud. A mech dropped from the ridge. It landed in the river with a massive splash that nearly knocked them off their feet. It was 12 feet tall, a humanoid war machine painted in matte black. Its single red optic sensor glowed menacingly as it swiveled toward them. A Gatling laser cannon on its arm spun up with a high-pitched whine. "Move!" Dax screamed. He grabbed Varel and threw her toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. "Run! Go! I will not leave you!" she cried, freezing. Dax turned back to face the mech. The cannon fired. Dax dove. The water erupted. He wasn't fast enough. A bolt of superheated plasma caught him in the left side, just below the ribs. It punched through his flight suit and cauterized the flesh instantly. The force of the impact spun him around and slammed him face first into the muddy water. "Dax!" Varel screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and primal. Dax surfaced, gasping, the water around him swirling with dark blood. He struggled to stand, his blaster raising shakily. The mech took a step forward, raising a massive metal foot to crush him. Varel felt something inside her snap. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't a decision, it was a biological imperative. The fear, the grief, the overwhelming rage at seeing the only being who had ever treated her like a person broken and bleeding. It coalesced into a singular point of white-hot energy in the center of her chest. She didn't scream this time. She didn't wave her hand. She simply let go. "Stop." The command hit the air like a physical hammer. The mech froze. Then, with a screech of tearing metal, its leg crumpled. The massive machine was lifted into the air, suspended by an invisible hand, and hurled backward into the canyon wall. But the energy didn't stop there. Varel looked up at the mercenaries on the ridge. Her eyes were solid white, her hair was floating in a halo of static. She raised both hands and pulled them down. The ridge exploded, thousands of tons of rock, mud, and shale sheared off the canyon wall. The mercenaries didn't even have time to scream as the mountain collapsed beneath them. The landslide roared down, burying the mech, burying the river, burying the violence in a chaotic tomb of stone. Dust billowed up, choking the air. Silence fell over the ravine. Dax was clutching his side, leaning against the boulder, staring with wide, shocked eyes. The canyon was gone. The enemy was gone, reshaped by the will of a girl who had once been afraid of a protein bar. Varel stood in the center of the settling dust. The glow faded from her skin, leaving her looking small and gray. She looked at her hands, then at the devastation she had caused. She turned slowly to look at Dax. Horror was etched into every line of her face. I did that, she whispered. She began to shake, her knees giving way. She collapsed into the shallow water, sobbing. Dax gritted his teeth against the pain in his side and waded over to her. The water was murky with silt and blood. He dropped to his knees beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Varel, look at me. She wouldn't look. She was staring at the rubble pile where living beings had been seconds ago. I am a monster, she choked out. Karth was right. I am a weapon. Dax put a hand on her cheek, forcing her to look at him. His own face was pale, tight with pain, but his eyes were steady. You are not a weapon, he rasped. You survived. There is a difference. He pulled her forehead against his. You are still you, Varel. I know it. The girl who likes peanut butter bars and hates wet socks, that is still in there. She clung to him, her sobs racking her body, soaking his shirt with tears and river water. We have to go, Dax whispered, wincing as a fresh wave of agony rolled over him. I think I am leaking pretty bad. Varel pulled back, her eyes dropping to his side. The water around his waist was red. Dax, I am okay. He lied, trying to stand and stumbling. Just need a minute. No, she said, her voice hardening with panic. We need shelter. Now. She half-carried, half-dragged him to a small cave hidden behind a waterfall of runoff, a mile upstream from the ambush. It was damp and cold, but it was defensible. Varel laid him down on the sandy floor. Dax was shivering uncontrollably now, his skin gray and clammy. The wound in his side was ugly, a blackened, cauterized crater that was cracking open and oozing blood with every breath. Dax watched her through hazy vision. She was frantic, tearing strips from her tunic to pack the wound. It is deep, she murmured, her hands shaking. It burned the organ. What is it? The spleen? Kidney, Dax wheezed. Who needs two, right? Stop talking, she commanded, her voice trembling. She pressed her hands over the wound. The bleeding slowed, but Dax's breathing was getting shallower. Shock was setting in. Varel looked at her hands, the hands that had just crushed a mountain. She felt the energy buzzing under her skin, not the destructive force of the canyon, but something else. The regeneration, the power that had healed her ankle in hours. She looked at Dax. He was fading. I can fix this, she whispered. Dax's eyes fluttered open. No magic tricks, sparkles. Save your strength. It is not magic, she said, her voice gaining a strange resonance. It is life, biology, my cells. They adapt, they share. She began to unbuckle his belt. Whoa! Dax managed a weak, lopsided grin. At least buy me dinner first. I am serious. Dax, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I have to initiate a transfer. Rapid cellular regeneration requires a catalyst, intimacy, heightened physical connection. It opens the pathways. She stripped off her wet, torn tunic. Her violet skin glowed softly in the dim cave, the markings on her body pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic light. She looked like a deity carved from amethyst. She leaned over him, unzipping the rest of his flight suit, exposing his chest and the terrible wound. "It will hurt," she warned softly. "It will burn." Dax looked up at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the love. "Do it," he whispered. She lowered herself onto him. When their skin touched, it wasn't like the first time. There was no awkwardness, no playful exploration. This was survival. Varel gasped as she connected with him, her body acting as a conduit. She placed her hands directly over his wound. Light, blinding, violet light, erupted from her palms. Dax arched his back and screamed. It felt like she was pouring molten lead into his side. But beneath the pain, there was something else. Knitting together. A rapid, aggressive reconstruction of tissue. He could feel her energy pouring into him, mixing with his own bioelectric field. She moved with him, a desperate rhythm of friction and fusion. Her eyes were locked on his, glowing white. She wasn't just healing his body, she was in his head. He could feel her fear, her guilt over the soldiers, her fierce, possessive need to keep him alive. "Stay." Her voice echoed in his mind. "Do not leave me." "I am here," he projected back, gripping her hips, anchoring her to the earth. The cave filled with the hum of their connection, a sound that vibrated in the stones. The pain in Dax's side shifted, turning into a searing heat that spread through his entire body, chasing away the cold of the shock. It was an act of consumption and creation. She was taking his pain, and he was taking her life force, with a final shuddering cry. Varel collapsed atop him. The light flared one last time, bright enough to leave shadows on the cave walls, and then vanished. Silence returned, broken only by their harsh, ragged breathing and the drip of water from the cave mouth. Dax lay still, staring up at the rock ceiling. He felt whole, weak, exhausted, but the gnawing agony in his side was gone, replaced by a dull ache and new, tender skin. He lifted a hand and stroked Varel's hair. She was trembling against him, her skin cool now. "Did it work?" he rasped. Varel lifted her head. She looked drained, pale, but her eyes were clear. She looked down at his side. The wound was gone. In its place was a scar, not a jagged, ugly thing, but a smooth pattern of violet tissue that swirled like the markings on her own skin. "You are marked," she whispered, tracing the scar with a finger. "You carry my blood now." Dax looked at the mark, a permanent souvenir. "Better than a tombstone," he said. He pulled her up so her face was level with his. He kissed her, gently this time, tasting salt and rain. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Touching a human? Starting all this?" Varel rested her forehead against his. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, mud, blood, and ozone. "No," she answered. "I regret that I waited so long." They reached the crash site at dusk the next day. The Banshee was a wreck. The starboard wing was sheared off, buried in the canopy a mile back. The fuselage was crumpled like a crushed soda can, half submerged in a swamp. Vines were already beginning to claim the metal, wrapping around the thrusters, but the cockpit glass was intact, and a faint blue light pulsed from the dashboard. "Home, sweet home," Dax said, patting the hull. He pried open the emergency hatch. The interior was tilted at a 45-degree angle. Debris floated in the flooded lower deck. Dax climbed up to the flight deck, pulling Varel up behind him. He dropped into the pilot's seat, the same seat he had almost died in days ago. It felt like a lifetime. He punched a sequence into the console. "Come on, Betsy, wake up for Papa." The console flickered. Static hissed through the speakers. Then, a voice, synthetic, clipped, and female, filled the cockpit. "System reboot successful. Life support at 20%. Main reactor offline. Auxiliary power active." Varel looked around, wide-eyed at human technology. "It talks." "It is an AI," Dax said. "Artificial intelligence. Banshee. Run a diagnostic, then scan for local transmission signals." Scanning. The AI paused. "Alert. Unauthorized biological signature detected in proximity. Identification. Royal House Ethelgard. Threat assessment. High." Dax patted the console. "Belay that. She is with me. She is friendly. Mostly. Acknowledged. Override code accepted. Captain Miller. I have detected an encrypted signal directed at the passenger." Dax froze. "Directed at Varel?" "Affirmative. The signal is a localized neurolink frequency. It is attempting to triangulate a lock on her cerebral cortex." Varel grabbed Dax's arm. "The beacon." Dax looked at her. "What beacon?" "In my spine," she whispered, horrified. "All royals have a tracker implanted at birth. For kidnapping protection. I forgot." Signal analysis complete. The AI continued, its voice dispassionate. "The beacon is active. It is transmitting coordinates, and it is serving as a receiver for a remote neural override command." "Neural override?" Dax asked, his blood running cold. "Mind control," the AI clarified. "Someone is trying to hack her brain." "Captain Karth," Varel gasped. "He is not just hunting me. He is trying to take control of me, like he did to my father." Dax looked at the console, then at Varel. Her eyes were terrified. "Can you block it?" Dax asked the ship. "Negative. Signal source is internal to the subject. The only way to stop the transmission is to remove the hardware." Dax looked at the medical bay door, which was skewed on its hinges. "Warning," the AI added. "Signal strength is increasing. Estimated time until total neural override. 1 hour." Dax unbuckled his harness and stood up. He looked at Varel. "Get on the table," he said, his voice grim. "We are going to perform surgery." "But you are a pilot," Varel stammered. "Not a doctor." Dax grabbed a medkit from the wall. "Today, I am whatever keeps you alive. Move." The medical bay of the Banshee was a coffin of flickering fluorescent light and the smell of stale antiseptic. The air recyclers were whining, struggling to scrub the humidity of the jungle from the ship's interior. But the real heat was coming from the operating table. Varel lay face down on the biofoam mattress, her back exposed. The violet skin along her spine was pulsing with an angry, rhythmic light, marking the location of the foreign object. Dax stood over her, a laser scalpel in his hand. His knuckles were white, sweat dripped from his nose, landing on the sterile field he had draped over her. Incision depth insufficient. The ship's AI, Betsy, droned from the overhead speakers. "The device is anchored to the C7 vertebrae. You must cut through the dorsal muscle layer. Increase laser intensity to setting 4. Dax swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "I am a mechanic. Betsy. I fix engines. I do not carve up people. If you do not proceed, the subject's neural cortex will be overwritten in 12 minutes. She will cease to be an individual entity." Dax looked at Varel's face, turned to the side on the pillow. Her eyes were open, glazed with pain and the sedative hypospray he had administered. She was trembling. "Do it," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp. "Cut it out, Dax." Dax took a breath that rattled in his chest. He adjusted the dial on the scalpel. The beam hummed, turning a brighter, sharper blue. "Okay, sparkles," he said, his voice tight. "Try to think of something else. Think about rain." Think about that terrible protein bar you hated. He lowered the blade. Varel screamed. It was a sound that tore through the small room, vibrating against the metal bulkheads. Dax flinched but didn't pull back. He clamped his other hand onto her shoulder, holding her down as the laser parted her flesh. The smell of ozone and singing tissue filled the air. Target located, Betsy announced, void of empathy. The device is barbed. Extraction will cause significant neural feedback. Brace the patient. Dax worked the forceps into the incision. He could feel the vibration of the device through the metal instrument. It was buzzing, alive, fighting him. Varel's thrashing stopped abruptly. She went rigid, her muscles locking up. Her eyes rolled back, showing solid white. She began to speak. It wasn't the fever talk from the cave. This was cold, precise, and terrified. Sequence Alpha 9, she murmured, her voice dropping an octave. Genetic stability 99%. Donor match confirmed. Dax paused, his grip on the forceps slipping on a slick of purple blood. What did you say? Varel gasped, drool leaking from the corner of her mouth. Her mind was unraveling as the beacon tore at her memories. I am not a daughter, she choked out. I am a copy. Dax froze. Keep talking. Varel, stay with me. I have his face, she whispered, tears leaking from her unseeing eyes. The Emperor. I am not his heir. I am his restart, a clone, grown in a vat beneath the palace, to house his mind when his body fails. The horror of it hit Dax like a physical blow. The obsession with purity, the isolation, the neural parasite. It wasn't just about succession. It was about immortality. The Emperor was rotting, and he had grown Varel to be his new suit. And Karth? Dax asked, digging the forceps deeper, finding the purchase on the black metal chip. Who is Karth? Varel let out a high, keening sob. Karth is the trigger. He is not my cousin. He was designed, a genetic key, to breed with me, to unlock the biological transfer. Dax felt a surge of revulsion so strong his hands shook. They were livestock, both of them, engineered meat for a dying tyrant. Hold on, Dax growled. I am ending this. Now. He gripped the forceps with both hands. Warning. The AI blared. Neural surge detected. Dax didn't listen. He pulled. There was a wet, sickening snap. Varel arched off the table, her spine bending at an impossible angle. A shockwave of telekinetic force blasted outward from her body. The medical trays flew across the room. The overhead lights shattered, raining glass down on them. Dax was thrown back, slamming into the metal cabinets, but he didn't let go of the forceps. In the jaws of the tool, a small spider-like chip writhed and sparked. Dax scrambled up and threw the device onto the floor, stomping on it with his heavy boot until it was nothing but crushed silicon and wire. He turned back to the table. Varel was still. Too still. Varel? The subject is in cardiac arrest, Betsy stated. No, Dax roared. No, you do not get to quit. Not after that. He grabbed an adrenaline stimulant from the scattered medical supplies and jammed it into her neck. He placed his hands on her chest, right over her sternum, and began compressions. Breathe, he shouted. Come on, you stubborn royal pain in the ass, breathe. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. 1, 2, 3. Her skin was cooling. The violet glow was fading to a dull gray. Dax slammed his fist against her chest. Do not leave me here alone. A gasp. Varel's body jerked. She sucked in a massive, ragged breath, her back arching off the table. She coughed, violet blood spattering her lips, and collapsed back onto the biofoam. Dax slumped over her, resting his forehead on the mattress near her shoulder. He was shaking uncontrollably. You are okay, he whispered, his voice breaking. I got it. It is gone. Varel turned her head slowly, Her eyes focused on him. They were filled with a bottomless, ancient grief. She knew. The beacon's removal had unlocked the final encrypted files in her own mind. She knew exactly what she was. Dax gathered her up, pulling her bloody, trembling body against his chest. She didn't cry. She screamed. It was a sound of pure betrayal, mourning the mother she never had, the father who wanted to wear her skin, and the life that had been a lie from the moment of conception. Dax held her through it all, rocking her back and forth in the flickering dark of the medical bay, his own tears mixing with the blood on her back. An hour later, the mood in the cockpit was cold and sharp as a knife blade. Varel sat in the co-pilot's chair. Dax had bandaged her back and found her a spare flight suit. It was too big for her. The sleeves rolled up to her elbows, but she looked formidable. The grief had burned itself out, leaving behind a hard, diamond-like anger. "Are the transmitters ready?" she asked. Dax worked the console, rerouting the last of the ship's auxiliary power to the comms array. "We have enough juice for one broad-spectrum burst," Dax said. "We can hit every receiver on the planet, every holoscreen, every data pad, every military comm. But once we do, we light up like a bonfire on the sensors. Karth will know exactly where we are." "Let him come," Varel said. Dax looked at her. She wasn't glowing anymore. She seemed denser, heavier, as if gravity had decided to pull on her harder than everyone else. He punched the final key. "You are on the air." "Princess?" Varel leaned toward the microphone. She didn't shout. She spoke with the terrifying calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. "People of Ethelgard, this is Varel. You were taught that I am the daughter of the sun. You were taught that the human is a monster who came to devour us. You were lied to." She paused. On the screen, audio waves spiked as the signal punched through the atmospheric interference. "The Emperor is dead. The thing on the throne is a husk, eaten by the whispering void. I am not his heir. I am his vessel. And Prince Karth is the butcher who holds the knife. They have bred us like cattle to feed a hunger that will not stop with me. It will consume you all." Dax watched the signal propagate. It was hitting the capital, the military bases, the slums. "Rise up," Varel commanded. "Not for me, for yourselves. The cycle breaks today." Dax cut the feed. "Transmission complete," Betsy announced. "Energy reserves are critical. Warning, multiple bogies detected entering airspace. Fast movers. ETA 4 minutes. "That didn't take long," Dax muttered. He grabbed his rifle and tossed a bandolier of thermal grenades over his shoulder. "We can't stay here," he said. "The ship is a sitting duck. If they carpet bomb the swamp, we are toast." "Where do we go?" Varel asked, standing up. She winced, her hand going to her bandaged back, but she didn't slow down. Dax pointed out the viewport. To the north, jagged black ridges rose up, spewing magma into the gray sky. "The lava ridges," Dax said. "The magnetic interference from the magma flows will mess with their targeting sensors. And there are tunnels. Old ones." Varel nodded. "Into the fire, then." The chase was a blur of heat and noise. They abandoned the Banshee minutes before the first missiles hit. The shockwave knocked them flat into the mud, showering them with debris and swamp water. Dax looked back to see his ship, his home, his last connection to Earth, disappear in a ball of orange flame. He didn't look back again. They ran toward the ridges. The terrain shifted from soft mud to razor-sharp obsidian. The air grew hotter, tasting of sulfur and ash. Above them, the sky screamed. Karth had sent everything. Sleek, silver gunships strafed the ground, chewing up the rock with plasma fire. Dax and Varel moved from cover to cover, diving behind boulders as the ground erupted around them. Varel was struggling. The physical exertion was tearing at her stitches, but worse was the power. The stress of combat was triggering her mutation. Every time a shell landed near them, a pulse of violet energy flared from her body, vaporizing the rock or deflecting the shrapnel. It was getting harder for her to stop. "I can't. Hold it in," she gasped, stumbling as a gunship roared overhead. "Let it out!" Dax yelled, firing his rifle at the passing ship. "Aim it at them." Varel thrust her hand upward. A bolt of telekinetic force, raw and unshaped, slammed into the gunship's wing. The vessel spun out of control, crashing into the side of a volcano in a spectacular explosion. Dax grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Keep moving." They reached the lava fields, rivers of molten rock, thick and slow like honey, carved through the black stone. The heat was blistering. It singed the hair on Dax's arms and dried the sweat on his face instantly. "We need to cross," Dax shouted, pointing to a natural stone bridge that spanned a 50-foot river of magma. They sprinted across the bridge. Halfway across, a mech, one of the heavy hunter-killers, dropped from the cliffs above, landing on the far side. It blocked their path, its Gatling cannon spinning up. Dax skidded to a halt. Back! Behind them, 2 more mechs landed, sealing the retreat. They were trapped on the bridge. Below, the lava bubbled and popped. Varel let out a frustrated scream. Her eyes went white. She didn't throw the mechs. She grabbed the bridge. Dax felt the stone lurch under his feet. "Varel, what are you doing?" "Breaking the board," she yelled. She clenched her fists and pulled. The stone bridge cracked in the center. With a deafening roar, the section they were standing on detached from the main span. But it didn't fall. Varel held it suspended in the air, a floating island of rock above the magma. She swung the entire platform sideways, drifting them toward a gaping cave mouth in the canyon wall. The mechs opened fire. Plasma bolts slammed into their floating raft, blowing chunks of stone into the lava. "Jump!" Varel screamed. They leaped from the crumbling stone just as it disintegrated under the heavy fire. They hit the ledge of the cave mouth, rolling onto the cool, damp floor of the tunnel. Dax scrambled up, checking Varel. She was panting, her skin gray, the veins on her neck standing out like gold cords. "That was impressive," Dax wheezed. Varel didn't answer. She just pointed into the dark. "Go." The tunnels were ancient, carved by the same race that had built the memory shrine. The walls were smooth and lined with dormant machinery. They ran through the dark, guided only by the light of Dax's rifle torch and the faint glow of Varel's skin. They could hear the pursuit behind them, the heavy rhythmic thud of mech footsteps echoing in the stone. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. Finally, they saw light ahead. The exit. They burst out into the open air and stopped dead. They were on a high plateau, a flat table of rock surrounded on 3 sides by a sheer drop into a churning sea of lava. But they weren't alone. Waiting for them, standing in front of a sleek, royal shuttle, was Prince Karth. He was flanked by 20 elite enforcers, the Emperor's personal guard, and 2 of the heavy mechs. Karth looked impeccable. His armor was polished black chrome, his cape billowing in the hot wind. The black veins of the parasite had spread, covering half his face in a web of corruption, but he smiled as if he were greeting old friends. "Cousin," Karth called out, his voice amplified by his helmet. "You look terrible." Varel straightened. She stepped past Dax, her head high. "Traitor." She spat. Karth chuckled. He walked forward, stopping 10 paces away. The soldiers raised their weapons. "The game is over." "Varel." The transmission was annoying. "Yes, but control can be re-established. The people are sheep. They will believe what I tell them to believe. Once I have you." He turned his gaze to Dax. "And you, the stray dog." Karth gestured to the soldiers. I have a proposition. The human lives. I will give him a ship. I will give him fuel. He can leave this moon and never look back. Dax tightened his grip on his rifle. And in exchange? Karth smiled. In exchange, Varel surrenders. She submits to the procedure. She fulfills her destiny. Varel looked at Dax. Her eyes were pleading. No. Do not listen to him. Karth ignored her. Come now. Mr. Miller, you are a survivor, a scavenger. You know a bad deal when you see one. You cannot win this fight. Look around. You are outgunned, outnumbered, and out of time. Walk away. Live to steal another day. Dax looked at the soldiers. He looked at the mechs. He looked at Karth's smug, corrupted face. Then he looked at Varel. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding her power in check. Dax sighed. He lowered his rifle. He stepped forward, away from Varel. Dax? Varel whispered, her voice breaking. Dax looked at Karth. You promise? I get a ship. I get to walk. I swear it on the throne, Karth said, his smile widening. Dax nodded. He slowly sank to his knees, placing his rifle on the ground. He raised his hands behind his head. Okay, Dax said. You win. Varel let out a sound of shattered belief. Dax looked up at Karth. Just one thing. Karth raised an eyebrow. Yes? Dax grinned. It was the same reckless, arrogant grin he had worn when he first met Varel in the cell. I never steal. I scavenged. There is a difference. Dax's fingers, hidden behind his head, pulled the pin on the thermal grenade he had palmed from his bandolier. He didn't throw it at Karth. He threw it at the ground, directly between the soldiers and the mechs. Duck! Dax roared, tackling Varel. The grenade detonated. It wasn't a normal explosion. It was a thermal charge designed to melt tank armor. A sphere of blinding white heat erupted, instantly turning the rock into slag and creating a massive cloud of superheated steam and dust. The soldiers screamed as the heat wave hit them. The mechs stumbled, their sensors blinded. Dax rolled, dragging Varel behind a jagged outcropping of rock. Now! Dax yelled. Do not hit them hard, hit them deep. Varel stood up. She understood. She didn't use the force. She didn't throw rocks. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She found the mental frequency of the soldiers, the fear, the obedience, the doubt her broadcast had planted. She pushed. She didn't push through the pain. She pushed the truth. Look at him. She projected. Every soldier on the plateau froze. In their minds, the image of Karth shifted. The handsome prince dissolved. They saw the parasite. They saw the black tentacles wrapped around his brainstem. They saw the emperor rotting in his tank. They saw the vats where Varel was grown. They saw the lie. The soldiers lowered their weapons. They looked at Karth, terror and revulsion dawning on their faces. The deception broke. Karth screamed. It was a dual sound, his voice and the chittering screech of the parasite. No. Obey me, I am the state. He drew his own weapon, a heavy gilded disruptor pistol. He didn't aim at the soldiers. He aimed at Varel. If I cannot have you, I will burn you to ash. Dax saw the move. He was 10 feet away, too far to tackle Karth, too far to shoot, but close enough to jump. Karth fired. The beam of dark energy tore through the air. Dax threw himself in front of Varel. The impact made no sound. It was just a sudden, violent stop. The beam hit Dax in the center of his chest. It didn't burn like the plasma. It was dismantled. It tore through his armor, his flight suit, his flesh, unmaking him cell by cell. Dax collapsed backward, crashing into Varel. They hit the ground together. Varel stared at him. There was a hole in his chest, a clean, terrible hole where his heart should have been. Dax looked up at her. His eyes were wide, surprised. He tried to speak, but only a bubble of blood escaped his lips. His hand reached up, brushing her cheek. His fingers were cold. Then, his hand fell. Dax Miller, the scavenger, the pilot, the man who liked peanut butter, was gone. The silence on the plateau was absolute. The wind stopped. The lava stopped bubbling. Even the soldiers stood like statues. Virel looked at the body. Something inside her broke. Not her heart, not her mind. The universe. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, light came out, and it poured from her eyes, her mouth, the pores of her skin. It wasn't violet anymore, it was white. Pure, blinding, absolute white. It swallowed the plateau. It swallowed Karth. It swallowed the sky. Everything stops. Time didn't just freeze, it shattered. Virel felt the beacon in her DNA unlock the final door. The door the ancients had hidden. The door the Emperor had been trying to pry open for 1,000 years. She wasn't just a clone. She was a catalyst, a biological singularity. The white light dissolved the rock. It dissolved the soldiers, but it dissolved the air. She felt Dax's body in her arms disintegrating into light. No, she thought. I refuse. She reached into the light. She reached into the fabric of reality, gripping the threads of time that were fraying around her. Reversal. She pulled. The light imploded. The sound returned, a deafening, rushing wind. The heat returned, but the darkness did not. Virel closed her eyes and let the power consume her, dragging her and the man she loved into the unknown space between life and death. Then, there was nothing. Waking up was not violent. It was not a gasp for air or a sudden jolt of adrenaline. It was a slow, drifting return, like a leaf settling on the surface of a still pond. Dax Miller opened his eyes. He expected the red haze of the lava fields. He expected the screaming face of Prince Karth. He expected the cold, absolute finality of the disruptor beam tearing his heart apart. Instead, he saw a stone, but it was not the cold, jagged obsidian of the ridges. This stone was warm, honey-colored, and seemed to be breathing. Vines of pale gold wove through the masonry, pulsating with a gentle, rhythmic light. The ceiling was high and vaulted, open to the sky, where soft violet clouds drifted lazily. Dax lay on a bed of woven moss and silk. The air smelled of jasmine, ozone, and rain. He sat up. Panic flared for a microsecond, a soldier's reflex, but it died instantly, smothered by the overwhelming tranquility of the room. His hand flew to his chest. He remembered the hit. He remembered the feeling of his own atoms coming undone. He remembered the hole. His fingers brushed his skin. It was smooth, unbroken. Dax looked down. There was no scar. There was no burn mark. The only evidence that anything had happened was a faint, spiraling pattern on his pectoral muscle, glowing with a dim white light that matched the vines on the walls. It looked like a star map branded into his flesh. I am dead, Dax thought. This is the afterlife. And apparently, the afterlife has excellent interior design. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His body felt heavy, but not with fatigue. It felt dense, charged, as if gravity had a stronger grip on him, or as if he had more soul than he used to. He stood up. He was wearing loose trousers of white linen, his boots, his blaster, his armor, all gone. He walked to the archway that led to a wide stone balcony. The view stopped him in his tracks. He was high up, higher than the Crystal Palace had been. Below him stretched a valley of impossible greenery. It was the jungle, but tamed, vibrant, and blooming with colors that defied the spectrum he knew. In the distance, he could see the smoking ruins of a city, Karth's stronghold. But nature was already reclaiming it, burying the black metal under waves of emerald and teal. This was not the moon he had crashed on. It was older, or perhaps newer. You slept for a long time. The voice came from behind him. It did not startle him. It felt like a melody he had already been humming in his head. Dax turned. Varel stood in the center of the room. If she had been beautiful before in her terrifying alien way, she was now something beyond comprehension. She was no longer just the violet-skinned girl in a torn tunic. She was luminous. Her skin had taken on a pearlescent quality, shifting like an opal in the light. Her hair was a floating halo of white fire, moving as if underwater. But it was her eyes that held him. The frightened, dilated pupils were gone. Her eyes were galaxies, deep, swirling pools of starlight that saw everything and judged nothing. She was terrifying. She was magnificent. Sparkles? Dax rasped. His voice sounded unused, deep and gravelly. Varel smiled. It was a small human smile, incongruous with the celestial power radiating from her. Hello. Dax. Dax took a step toward her, then stopped. He felt a strange hesitation. She looked like she might burn him if he touched her. Not with heat, but with sheer existence. Am I dead? Dax asked. Varel shook her head, the movement leaving a trail of light in the air. No. We are elsewhere. When the beam hit you, I refused it. I refused the ending as she walked toward him. She did not walk so much as glide, her feet barely touching the stone floor. I pulled on the strands of time, she explained softly. I found a thread where you did not die, a thread where the energy of the disruptor was absorbed, not destructive. It broke the world. Dax. It broke the timeline. We have been in this temple, in a pocket of stillness, while the universe stitched itself back together. Dax stared at her. You rewrote reality? I nudged it. She corrected. She reached out and touched his chest, right over the glowing star map scar. Her fingers were cool. Solid. Real, you saved me, Dax whispered. You saved me first, she replied. You jumped. You took the shot. Why? Dax looked into those galaxy eyes. He thought about the logic of it. There was none. He was a survivor. Survivors do not jump in front of bullets for alien princesses. But he wasn't just a survivor anymore. I did not like his face, Dax joked weakly, and I figured the universe needed you more than it needed a mechanic from Ohio. Varel's expression softened, the cosmic intensity dimming to a warm, affectionate glow. The universe is indifferent, Dax. But I am not. She took his hand. Her grip was firm. Come. There is much you have missed. They walked through the temple. It was a massive structure, grown rather than built, carved from the living rock of the mountain. As they descended the wide, spiraling ramps, Dax saw people. They were everywhere. Ethel guardians with their violet skin and tall frames, humans in ragged flight suits, survivors from other crashes or forgotten colonies. Other species Dax did not recognize, reptilian, insectoid, cybernetic. They were not fighting. They were eating, talking, and sleeping in the alcoves. They stopped when they saw Varel. A hush fell over the great hall. They did not bow in fear. They bowed in reverence, a deep, silent acknowledgement of something holy. They call you something, Dax noted, seeing the awe on the faces of a group of Ethel Guardian children. Varel nodded, looking straight ahead. They call me the Mother of Unity. They call me the Star Breaker. She tightened her grip on his hand. But mostly, they call me the one who chose the human. Dax raised an eyebrow. Catchy. I guess Dax's girlfriend didn't test well with the focus groups. Varel let out a laugh, a bright musical sound that shattered the solemn atmosphere. Several refugees looked up, startled to hear their deity giggle. Dax looked out at the crowd. What happened to the Empire? What happened to Karth? Varel's face darkened slightly. Karth is gone. When I released the truth, when I showed them the rot at the heart of the throne, his authority evaporated. His own guards turned on him. The parasite consumed him in the end. Without a host to control, the hive mind shattered. She gestured to the open archways leading to the jungle. The empire collapsed within days. The governors tried to seize power, but the people would not have it. The message I sent, it woke them up. There is still fighting, warlords trying to carve out kingdoms from the ashes. But here, she looked around the temple. Here, there is peace. We accept anyone, royalist deserters, human scavengers. If they lay down their weapons, they are fed. If they seek healing, they are healed. Dax looked at her. You could rule them. You know, you could snap your fingers and end the civil war. You could be the empress. I know, Varel said. The generals came to me. They offered me the crown. They offered me the fleet. They begged me to impose order. And you said no? I said that the order imposed is just another cage, she said fiercely. I said that I was bred to be a tyrant, to be a vessel for a dead man's will. I will not be that. I will not force peace upon them. They must choose it, just as you chose. She led him out of the great hall and into the gardens that surrounded the temple. The gardens were a testament to her power. Plants from earth, roses, oaks, corn, grew alongside the glowing bioluminescent flora of the moon. It was a chaotic, beautiful tangle of two worlds intertwining. They walked in silence for a while, the gravel crunching under Dax's boots. He felt out of place in this paradise. He was a creature of grit and oil, a man who fixed broken engines, not a saint walking in a holy garden. Dax stopped by a fountain carved from obsidian. The water flowed upward, defying gravity, a playful display of physics. So what now? Dax asked. You stay here? You become the gardener of the galaxy? Varel turned to him. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw, her touch sending a shiver of pure energy through him. I cannot stay, she said quietly. I am too much for this world now. My presence here warps the natural laws. The plants grow too fast. The time dilates. If I stay, I will become a singularity. I will consume the very people I want to protect. Dax felt a cold knot in his stomach. So you are leaving? Yes. Alone? Varel looked at him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the answer he had already given her 1,000 times in the silence of his coma. That depends, she said. Depends on what? On the scavenger, she whispered. On whether he is still hungry. Dax looked at her. He looked at the temple, the sanctuary she had built from the wreckage of a nightmare. He looked at the peace she had created by refusing power. You know, Dax said slowly, I never really liked this moon. Too humid. And the bugs are the size of Buicks. Varel smiled, her eyes shimmering. I have heard, she said, that there are stars in the outer rim where the nebulas sing. I have heard there are planets made of glass. Dax stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. He felt the hum of her power, the immense, terrifying energy she held in check, just so she could stand close to him without atomizing him. You did not take what you could have, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. In the tunnel, with Karth. You could have taken the deal. You could have taken the ship and left me to the darkness, but you gave me a choice. Dax rested his forehead against hers. I didn't come to conquer. Sparkles. I came to survive. I was just looking for scrap to fix my ship. I was ready to let the whole galaxy burn as long as I got away. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Then you made me want to live. There is a difference. Virel let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She pulled him toward her, and the world dissolved. Their quarters were high in the temple, a room open to the stars. This time, there was no desperation. There was no fear of impending death, no race against a biological clock, no frantic need to heal a wound. This time, it was worship. When Dax touched her, he didn't just feel skin, he felt the echo of the stars she had been born from. He felt the history of her bloodline, the pain, the isolation, and he felt her washing it away. Virel was not passive. She moved with a grace that was almost liquid, her body glowing with a soft golden light that illuminated the room. She explored him with a reverence that humbled him. She kissed the scar on his chest, her lips lingering on the mark of her own power. You are warm, she whispered against his skin. You are so wonderfully solid. Dax held her, grounding her. He was the anchor to her storm. When she threatened to drift into pure energy, he pulled her back to the earth, to the physical, to the simple reality of breath and touch. The lovemaking was slow, a conversation without words. It was a fusion of his grit and her grace, his mortality and her transcendence. When they finally joined, it wasn't an explosion, it was a sunrise, a slow, blinding realization of unity. Dax felt his own boundaries dissolving. For a moment, he saw what she saw. He saw the web of life connecting the jungle to the stars. He heard the thoughts of the sleepers in the temple below, dreams of hope, fear, and peace. He realized then that she wasn't just a powerful psychic. She was a new evolutionary step, and she had chosen him, a broken, sarcastic human mechanic, to be her tether. They lay together afterwards, the golden light fading to a comfortable twilight. Dax ran his hand down the curve of her spine, where the beacon used to be. Smooth, he murmured. Virel rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heart, a heart she had restarted. I am free, she whispered. For the first time in my life, I belong to no one. Dax kissed the top of her head. You belong to yourself, Virel. That is the only thing that matters. She shifted, looking up at him. And you? To whom do you belong? Dax Miller? Dax smirked, the old playful glint returning to his eyes. I am a freelancer, but I am currently accepting a long-term contract. The pay is terrible, but the benefits are out of this world. Virel laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing in the galaxy. The departure was quiet. They did not wake the refugees. They did not hold a ceremony. Virel left a data crystal on the throne of the temple, a manifesto, a guide, a constitution for a new society built on choice rather than blood. They walked down to the lower hangars, deep in the belly of the mountain. There, waiting in the shadows, was the ship. It was not the Banshee, and it was not one of the sleek, royal yachts. It was a monstrosity, a beautiful, chaotic hybrid of scavenged human tech and elegant Ethelgardian crystal. The hull was matte black, scarred and welded, but the wings were made of translucent, singing diamond. The engines were massive, salvaged from a heavy freighter, but the navigation array was a neural link spire of pure gold. It looked like them. Dax ran his hand along the landing strut. I call her the unexpected, Dax said. Virel tilted her head. It lacks poetry, but it is accurate. Dax hit the ramp release. Does it fly? Virel smiled. I am the engine, Dax. It will fly where I dream it to fly. They walked up the ramp. The interior was a mix of Dax's utilitarian comfort, pilot seats with worn leather, manual switches, a coffee maker bolted to the bulkhead, and Virel's aesthetic soft lighting, holographic displays, air that smelled of rain. Dax sat in the pilot's chair. It fit him perfectly. He flipped the pre-flight toggles. The ship hummed to life, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated in the deck plates. "Systems green," Dax said. "Life support is active. Navcom." "Well, the Navcom is confused, but we will figure it out." He looked over at Varel. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, looking out the viewport at the temple she was leaving behind. She was leaving her people, her history, and her crown. "Any regrets?" Dax asked softly. Varel turned to him. Her eyes were bright, filled with the reflection of the stars outside. She reached across the console and took his hand. Her touch was warm, electric, and full of promise. "None," she said. She looked forward, into the black void of space, into the infinite possibilities of the unknown. "Let us go somewhere they do not fear us," she whispered, holding his hand, and this time, she was the one leading him into the stars. Dax punched the throttle. The engines roared, a defiant shout against the gravity of the moon. The unexpected lifted off, soaring over the jungle, over the ruins of the Empire, and punching through the clouds. They rose higher, the sky turning from violet to black. The stars welcomed them, cold and bright and endless. Dax looked at the woman beside him, the monster, the princess, the goddess, the love of his life. He grinned. Corset, sparkles. "Let's see what is out there." The ship streaked forward, a streak of light against the darkness, and vanished into hyperspace, leaving the past behind for a future they would write together.